They called it the City of Brass, the Golden City, a mythical place whose name became a metaphor for inaccessibility. In the European imagination, it was the ultimate mirage. A city of pure fantasy, shimmering at the edge of the known world. Its name, Timbuktu. The whispers claimed it was paved in gold, that its merchants were kings, trading in precious spices, ivory, and enough bullion to make the royal courts of Europe blush. For centuries, explorers risked everything, disease, starvation, and the scorching sun to reach this promised land. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. Tonight, we are chasing not the myth of gold, but the far richer and deeper truth buried beneath the desert sands. When the few who survived the journey finally arrived, they didn't find the gold-paved streets they dreamed of. They found a city of modest clay architecture, dusty markets, and weary travelers. Many declared Timbuktu a disappointment, a myth debunked. And that is where history went silent, because the truth about Timbuktu was a treasure far greater than any gold. It was the legendary center of human knowledge, a repository of science, law, and philosophy. The world's largest hidden library, an intellectual oasis that rivaled Alexandria. Timbuktu's riches weren't counted in ounces of gold, but in millions of forgotten words. So what secrets did this silent city hold, and who risked everything to protect them from being erased forever? To understand Timbuktu's true legacy, we must leave behind the colonial fantasies of gold and travel back to the 14th century, into the heart of the great West African empires. Timbuktu's location was not a magical accident. It was a strategic masterpiece. It sat precisely where the desert's main supply. Salt from the north met the rainforest's main resource, gold from the south. This made it the central hub of the vast trans-Saharan trade network. But what made the city truly flourish was the arrival of the Islamic scholar. As the Mali Empire, and later the Songhai Empire, solidified their power, rulers like Mansa Musa understood that lasting wealth wasn't just gold. It was knowledge. Mansa Musa brought back architects and jurists, establishing institutions of learning, like the legendary Sankar Madrasa. This was the intellectual engine of the Songhai civilization, not just a single library, but a network of colleges, teaching hospitals, and book markets. Imagine a medieval European university, but instead of Latin, the language of instruction was Arabic, and the subjects ranged far beyond theology. Scholars from as far away as Cairo, Baghdad, and Cordoba traveled hundreds of miles through the desert to debate, study, and copy texts here. This era transformed Timbuktu into the manuscript city. Knowledge became the primary commodity, prized as highly as any ingot of gold. Books were not chained to shelves. They were traded, copied by hundreds of professional scribes, and passed down through generations of family scholars. So, if Timbuktu was an intellectual rival to the greatest cities of the world, what extraordinary insights were contained within the pages of these millions of texts? The answer is a history we are only just beginning to recover. These are not merely religious texts. These manuscripts are a complete, sophisticated portrait of a pre-colonial African civilization. They span over 600 years and cover every imaginable aspect of life. Imagine a single text on astronomy. It doesn't just chart the stars, calculates planetary movements, predicts lunar eclipses, and details instruments used to measure the sun's angle. All while European astronomers were often still bound by ancient dogma. Consider the mathematical works. Timbuktu scholars were not only fluent in algebra and geometry, but they were applying these principles to practical engineering, calculating irrigation flows for their agriculture, and determining the precise angle of their great mosques. But the most surprising content may be in medicine and public health. There are texts that detail specific surgical procedures, including the removal of cataracts. Others describe complex herbal pharmacology, some of which predates similar European studies by centuries, and the law. The manuscripts hold volumes of incredibly precise legal and ethical debates. There are rulings on everything from environmental protections, such as the responsible harvesting of trees, to complex property rights, and commercial law governing the gold and salt trade. This is the true legacy, proof that Africa was not a continent waiting to be discovered or civilized. It was a region of immense self-developed intellectual power that actively contributed to the global pool of knowledge. The only reason this story is whispered, rather than shouted, is simple. These texts were forced into silence. They faced threats from colonial powers who sought to erase African history, and later from extremist groups who sought to destroy it. In 2012, that threat became terrifyingly real, and it sparked one of the greatest and most dangerous acts of cultural preservation in modern history. The reason this story is whispered rather than shouted is simple. These texts were forced into silence. For centuries, the manuscripts of Timbuktu were treated with neglect by colonial powers who preferred a historical narrative of an uncivilized Africa, allowing these irreplaceable documents to deteriorate from heat, humidity, and insects. They became brittle. Forgotten treasures kept hidden away in private family homes and chest lockers. But the most direct and terrifying threat to this history came much more recently. In 2012, extremist militant groups occupied Timbuktu. These were groups who viewed the philosophical, scientific, even artistic content of the manuscripts, especially those detailing centuries of Islamic jurisprudence, as heretical. They were not interested in preserving history. They were interested in erasing it. Their intent was clear: to systematically burn and destroy every trace of Timbuktu's intellectual past. This triggered a desperate, real-life espionage thriller, spearheaded by one man, Abdelkader Haidara, a local librarian and curator who had spent decades cataloging these texts. Knowing the militants were coming, Haidara had to act immediately, but in total secrecy. It was an operation of impossible scale. Working with a network of dedicated couriers, Haidara organized the smuggling of over 377,000 manuscripts out of Timbuktu and across hundreds of miles of perilous desert roads. They were hidden in metal trunks, transported by rickshaws, donkeys, and speedboats across the Niger River, all under the noses of heavily armed patrol groups. The couriers were families who had guarded these texts for generations, and they were risking their lives. It's not for gold, but for paper. They paid bribes, faced death threats, and endured terrifying journeys just to get the fragile bundles of history to the relative safety of Mali's capital, Bamako. When the militants finally broke into the official library buildings, they found only empty shelves. They filmed the burning of a few documents as an act of propaganda, believing they had succeeded in destroying the history they hated, but they were too late. Thanks to the extraordinary courage of those librarians, a huge chunk of West Africa's intellectual history, the evidence of its sophistication, had been saved. The manuscripts were gone, spirited away in an act of preservation that reminds us that knowledge itself is the most valuable and most vulnerable treasure on earth. The Timbuktu manuscripts are safe for now, hidden in underground bunkers and makeshift archives in Bamako. But the act of saving them was only the first step. The ongoing challenge is making them accessible to the world. Today, there is an intense international effort to clean, catalog, and digitize these fragile texts. When they are finally scanned and uploaded, they won't just be available to scholars. They will become digital evidence of Africa's central role in global intellectual history, finally putting the myth of a dark continent to rest. This is why the echoes of forgotten lore matter. They don't just teach us about the past, they rewrite our present understanding of who we are. Timbuktu's knowledge survived fire, sand, neglect, and war, preserved by ordinary people who understood the true value of their inheritance. Remember that the most inspiring chapters of history are often found not in the grand palaces, but in the dusty, hidden corners of the world. Thank you for watching Whispered Chronicles, Echoes of Forgotten Lore. If this story of forgotten genius and modern-day heroism resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the silent parts of history. Let us know in the comments below which other overlooked historical stories you would like us to cover next. Until the next time, stay curious, keep a light lit, and as always, stay safe.